There is a particular kind of courage that no one talks about. Not the courage of the battlefield, or the emergency room, or the burning building. The quieter kind. The kind that gets a person out of a hotel room at 8 in the evening, into a car, through a stage door, and in front of a microphone when every part of that person is telling them to stay in the room and let the dark be dark for one more night. Robin Williams had that courage. He exercised it hundreds of times across a career that spanned 5 decades. But the year he exercised it most completely, most privately, most at cost, was 2013. The year he went back on the road not because he wanted to, but because he had to. The year the last tour began. And what happened on that tour, in mid-sized theaters and casino venues, and performing arts centers in cities whose names do not appear in the Hollywood biography, is the part of Robin Williams' story that the people who were there have never stopped talking about. Not because of what they saw on the stage, though what they saw on the stage was extraordinary, but because of what they understood, years later, about the man who had been standing on it. This is the story of the last tour, of the cities nobody remembers, of the nights nobody filmed, of a man who was running out of road and chose every single night to perform anyway. By 2013, Robin Williams had been famous for 35 years. He had won the Academy Award. He had sold out arenas. He had made films that would outlast everyone involved in making them. He had given, by any reasonable measure, more than any performer could be expected to give more laughter, more humanity, more of himself than most careers contain in their entirety. And he was, in the language that financial managers use when they are delivering news no one wants to hear, in difficulty. The specific details of Robin Williams's financial situation in 2013 have been documented elsewhere, and they are not the point of this story. What matters here is simpler and more human. A man who had earned more money than most people can imagine had found, through a combination of circumstances that included expensive divorces, a lifestyle that had never been modest, and investments that had not returned what they promised. That the freedom he had believed his success had purchased was not entirely available to him. He needed to work, not in the way that working people need to work, not for groceries or rent, but in the way that a man who has built his identity around a particular kind of giving needs to continue giving, even when the body is tired and the mind is heavier than it used to be. He announced a stand-up comedy tour, his first extensive touring since 2009, mid-sized venues, a mix of major markets and smaller regional stops. The ticket sales were strong. Robin Williams, who had performed through everything, through addiction and recovery, through marriages and their endings, through the full spectrum of what a life in public can cost, a person packed a bag and got on the tour bus. But something was different this time. The people who traveled with Robin on that tour described the experience in terms that are consistent across different accounts and different relationships. They describe a man who was present and extraordinary on stage, fully committed, giving everything, producing nights that audiences would remember for decades. And they describe a man who was, in the hours between stages, quieter than he had ever been. Not withdrawn, not cold, not in crisis, or not in the visible way that crisis tends to announce itself. Just quieter. More likely to sit with a cup of coffee and look out the window of the tour bus at the passing geography of interstate America than to fill the silence the way Robin Williams had always filled silences. More likely to listen than to talk. More likely to be still. His road manager, who had worked with Robin on previous tours, said after Robin's death, he was always the last one to run out of energy. In 2013, it wasn't like that. Not all the time. There were stretches on the bus where he was just looking out the window, and if you knew him, you knew that meant something. But the shows were something else entirely. The tour hit 32 cities between September and December of 2013, through the South, the Midwest, the Mountain States, the Pacific Northwest, the highways and loading docks and green rooms that constitute the backside of live entertainment. In each city, the pattern was the same. The advance team briefed the venue. The green room was prepared modest, nothing excessive. Robin Williams would arrive quietly, usually with one or two members of his core team, and then walk out of the wings and into the light and become something that the quiet transit gave no indication of. A theater manager in Columbus, Ohio described it. "I've worked in this building for 18 years. When Robin Williams walked out onto that stage, the room changed physically. The temperature changed. And then he started talking, and for the next 2 hours, nobody breathed who didn't have to." A woman named Carol Hendricks, who attended the Kansas City show with her husband on their anniversary, described it this way. "He was like watching someone think out loud at a speed the rest of us couldn't follow. And somehow, following him, you felt more alive. You felt like someone had opened a window in a room that had been closed too long." Critics who had followed Robin Williams' career for decades wrote about seeing something in those performances that felt different, more honest, more directly felt, less the performance of energy and more the giving of something from a deeper place. What they were seeing, though they could not have known it, was a man performing without a net. There is a night that several members of the tour crew have described, independently, as the night they understood something about Robin Williams they had not fully understood before. It was a Tuesday in November. The city was Davenport, Iowa, a mid-sized Mississippi River city, not a major market. The kind of stop on a touring schedule that exists because the routing makes geographic sense and the venue has a good capacity-to-cost ratio. The theater held 1,200 people. The show was sold out. Robin Williams arrived at the venue at 5:30 in the afternoon for a 7:30 show. The load-in was already complete. The stage was set. The sound check had been done by his technical team earlier in the day. He went to the green room. A production assistant named Claire Nakamura, 26 years old, 3 months into her first job in live touring, was assigned to the green room that evening. Her job was to make sure the writer was fulfilled, the room was comfortable, and that Robin Williams had whatever he needed in the hours before the show. What she found, when she knocked and entered, was Robin Williams sitting alone in an armchair in the corner of the room, not reading, not on the phone, not running material or warming up or doing any of the things that performers do in green rooms to manage the hours before a show. He was simply sitting, looking at the middle distance, a cup of coffee on the table beside him that had gone cold. Claire Nakamura checked the writer. Everything was in order. She asked if she could get him anything. Robin Williams looked at her for a moment. Then he asked her to sit down. She sat. For the next 45 minutes, Robin Williams asked Claire Nakamura about her life, where she was from Pasadena, California, how she had ended up in live touring. She had studied event production at college, had taken the first job offered, had been terrified for the first 2 weeks, and was now only slightly less terrified. Whether she liked it, she did, mostly, though the hours were hard and she missed her mother's cooking. He listened to everything she said. He asked follow-up questions. He made her laugh twice with observations about the touring life that were precise and gentle and entirely without condescension. At 7:15, he stood up, thanked her for the company, and walked out of the green room toward the stage. Claire Nakamura sat in the empty green room for a few minutes after he left. She would later say that the 45 minutes she spent in that green room in Davenport, Iowa, was one of the most significant conversations of her life, not because of what was said, but because of how she was listened to. "I was a nobody," she said. A 26-year-old production assistant on her first tour. He was Robin Williams. And for 45 minutes, I was the most important person in the room. I have thought about that many, many times since. I have tried to do that for other people. I don't always manage it, but I try. Robin Williams walked out onto the stage in Davenport, Iowa at 7:30 that evening. The show lasted 2 hours and 20 minutes. People in that theater have said, when asked, that it was the best stand-up performance they have ever witnessed. The tour moved on, city after city, venue after venue, the same pattern, the quiet arrival, the still green room, the walk to the stage, the transformation. In a mid-sized theater in Portland, Oregon, a man named Gerald Watts sat in the 7th row with a ticket he had bought 6 months earlier. Gerald was 58 years old. He had been a Robin Williams fan since Mork and Mindy. He had seen Robin perform twice before, once in the 1980s at a large arena show, once in the late 1990s at a television taping. He had bought the 2013 ticket because his wife had suggested it, because they both needed something good, because the preceding year had been hard in ways that are private and do not require detailing here. Gerald Watts described the Portland show in a letter written after Robin's death. "I walked into that theater carrying something heavy, and I walked out carrying something different. Not lighter, the heavy thing was still there, but accompanied. He made me feel, for 2 hours, that whatever I was going through was part of something human beings had always gone through and found ways to survive. He did it to 900 people at once, and I suspect each of us felt he was doing it specifically for us." Watts's letter was one of hundreds from audience members across the 32 cities. They describe different shows, different moments, but they share a common thread. The sense that what they witnessed was not entertainment in any ordinary sense, but something closer to contact, something that reached through the performance and addressed them directly. This was not new in Robin Williams's work, but in 2013, it was more present than it had ever been, as if the distance between the performer and the person had narrowed to something very small. The tour bus rolled through the American night, city to city, state to state. Robin Williams sat by the window on the long drives, the ones between shows in distant cities, the overnight halls where the bus moved while the crew slept, and the highways unreeled in the dark outside the glass. His road manager, checking on him during a late-night drive through Nebraska, found him awake at 2 in the morning, looking out at the flat darkness, a book open on his knee that he was not reading. He was asked if he was all right. He said he was fine. He said he liked the night drives. He said there was something about moving through the dark that he found useful, that it was like the time between shows, the space where you processed what had happened and prepared for what was next, without having to be anything in particular for anyone. Then he looked back out the window and was quiet. His road manager went back to his bunk and lay awake for a while, listening to the sound of the bus on the highway, thinking about what Robin had said and what he had not said, and the particular quality of that window staring that had been present on this tour in a way it had not been present on previous ones. He did not say anything to anyone at the time. There was nothing to say, exactly. Robin was performing. The shows were extraordinary. Whatever was happening in the quiet between them was Robin's private business, as it always had been, as it is for everyone. But he remembered the window. The tour reached its final weeks in December 2013. The routing had wound through the mountain states and was making its way back toward the coasts. There were 12 shows left, then 8, then 5. On a Thursday evening, in a mid-sized city in the Pacific Northwest, a city with a performing arts center that held 900 seats and had sold every one of them, Robin Williams gave what several crew members have independently described as the single greatest performance they witnessed on the entire tour. They cannot fully explain why that night was different from the others. The material was similar. The structure was similar. The audience was a typical touring audience, enthusiastic, present, ready. But something happened in the third act of that show that nobody has been able to describe adequately. Robin Williams was in the middle of a bit, a long, structured piece that had been developed over the course of the tour, and something shifted. The bit continued, but underneath it, running alongside the comedy like a second current, was something raw and more direct. Observations about time, about the strange experience of having lived a particular kind of life and finding yourself, at the end of a long road, still uncertain about the things that mattered most, about what it meant to keep going when going was hard, about the particular grace of ordinary people doing ordinary things without anyone watching. The audience laughed throughout. The material was funny, but several people in the audience reported, independently, that they were also crying, that the two things were happening simultaneously, that the laughter and the grief were not separate but the same response to the same thing, which was the experience of being in the presence of someone who was being completely, absolutely honest about what it felt like to be alive. A lighting technician named Marcus Webb, who had worked the show from the lighting board at the back of the house, said, "I've lit a lot of shows, thousands probably. You develop a kind of professional distance. You see the show through the technical requirements. You track the cues. You maintain focus." That night in the third act, I stopped tracking cues. I just watched. I don't think I moved for 20 minutes. I don't think I could have. Robin Williams finished the show. The applause was the kind that fills a room completely, that has nowhere to go, that simply exists as a form of gratitude too large for any other container. He stood at the front of the stage and looked at the room, and then he did something he had done at certain shows throughout the tour, though not at all of them, something small, unrehearsed, that the crew had learned to watch for because it always meant the show had been something more than a show. He put his hand over his heart, just for a moment, just briefly. Not a performance gesture, not a bow, something more private than that, directed inward rather than outward, a private acknowledgement of something received. Then he walked off stage. The tour ended in December 2013. Robin Williams went home to his house in Tiburon, California. He had projects in development. There was talk of new film work. He was set to begin filming a television series, The Crazy Ones, that had already been picked up by CBS and would premiere that fall. His road manager called a few weeks after the tour ended to check in. Robin was warm and funny on the phone, the familiar velocity back in his voice. They talked about specific shows, about Davenport, about Portland, about the Pacific Northwest night the crew still talked about. Robin said, "The audiences on this tour were different. They needed it more. You could feel it every city, every night. People carrying things. And when you can feel what people are carrying, it changes what you do up there. It stops being a show. It becomes something else." He paused. "I needed it too. I needed it as much as any of them." That sentence, "I needed it too," explains the 2013 tour more completely than any review or box office figure. He went back on the road because the economics required it. He stayed because the contact required it. The nightly act of standing in front of human beings who needed something and giving it to them not from surplus but from the same place of need, the same longing, the same desire to connect across the distance that life places between people. He was not performing down to his audiences in 2013. He was performing alongside them, with the same questions they had. And the shows were extraordinary because of it, because there is a quality of truth that only becomes available when a person stops pretending to have more than they do and simply offers what is actually there. What was actually there, in every city, every night, was Robin Williams. All of him, the full weight of what he carried and what he found, reliably, without exception, the moment he walked into the light. Robin Williams died in August 2014, 8 months after the last tour ended. The world grieved in the way that the world had grieved very few people in living memory, with the specific, personal grief of people who felt they had lost someone they knew, someone who had been in their lives in a way that transcended the normal relationship between entertainer and audience. Many of the people who wrote about him in the days and weeks after his death mentioned the 2013 tour. Not the famous films, not the legendary stand-up specials, not the awards or the cultural moments. The tour. The specific night in the specific city when Robin Williams had walked out onto a stage and done something that still, months or years later, they could not fully describe. Claire Nakamura, the production assistant who had sat in the green room in Davenport while Robin asked about her life, wrote on a personal blog after his death, "He was tired, I could see that, even then. And he chose to spend the time before the show listening to a nobody production assistant talk about her life. For Robin Williams, there was no such thing as a nobody. Everyone was worth being present for. I'm trying to learn that. I'm not sure I'll ever manage it the way he did, but I'm trying." Gerald Watts, the man from Portland who had walked in carrying something heavy, wrote, "I keep thinking about what he gave us, not the jokes, though the jokes were extraordinary. The sense that it was okay to be struggling. That struggle was not failure, but simply the experience of being alive. I needed exactly that exact night, and he gave it. Marcus Webb, the lighting technician who had stopped tracking cues, said he wasn't performing from strength. He was performing from the same place the audience was in, from uncertainty, from not knowing how things were going to turn out. And it tells them, if he can do this from here, maybe I can too. The last tour is not usually the chapter that biography leads with. The chapters biography leads with are the triumphs, the rise, the breakthrough, the celebrated works. Those chapters are real and they matter, but the last tour matters more than any of them. Because what Robin Williams did on those stages, in 2013 inches, Davenport and Portland and Columbus and Kansas City and 30 other cities, was not triumph in any conventional sense. It was something rarer and more honest. It was a man choosing, night after night, to show up for people from a place of genuine need rather than comfortable surplus, choosing to give even when giving was hard, choosing the stage not because it was safe, but because it was the truest place he knew, where the performance and the person finally became the same thing, where laughter and grief ran together in the same river and reached everyone in the room at once. He needed it as much as any of them. He showed up anyway, every night, in every city, under whatever lights were available. And the people who were there, Claire Nakamura in the green room, Gerald Watts in the 7th row, Marcus Webb at the lighting board, carried what they received forward into their lives. They are still carrying it. That is the legacy of the last tour. Not the box office, not the reviews. The fact that a man running on less than he had ever run on chose every single night to walk out of the wings and into the light and give the people in the dark everything he had left. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was, by every measure that actually matters, everything.